There's so much hype about EVs, but everyone's forgetting one important thing. The average American can't even afford one. Despite that, the Biden administration is actively working to impose EVs on all Americans. Today, I'll show you the current demographics of Americans, so you can see why EVs are unachievable for many. I'll also share how Biden's plans will impact not just Americans consumers like yourself, but also car makers too. And stay tuned to see why Toyota may go out of business, and how GM and Ford will soon overtake Tesla. Everyone knows the price of gasoline has gone up, but many don't realize the real pain. It's like boiling a frog or a lobster. When you apply more heat, just a little at a time, it's hard to know you're stewing. Well, it's the same thing with gas prices. If you want to see how much gas prices have jumped, just rewind. You'll see that gas has jumped almost 44%. That's not just more than inflation, it's simply crazy. That's why more consumers are looking into EVs than ever before. Last February, the average price for a new gasoline-powered car was $45,600, whereas the average cost of a new EV exceeded $60,000. Of course, it's possible to buy a used combustion engine car for much less than a lower-end EV. For example, in the Atlanta metro area, the most affordable used EV with the model year 2018 or newer was around $50,000, although most were well over $60,000. Yet there were literally hundreds of used gasoline-powered vehicles for sale for less than $20,000. So how rich or poor are Americans today? How many Americans can afford an EV? Well, it used to be that America was made up mostly of the middle class. Some 61% of adults, to be exact. But believe it or not, in the last 50 years, the middle class has shrunk significantly down to 44%. Right now, only 18% of U.S. households are considered upper class, meaning that they earn more than $156,000 annually. Obviously, they're in the best position to opt for an EV if they want. And right now, the U.S. median household income is $67,000. Some 20% of American households are in the $25,000 to $50,000 income bracket. You have 18% of American households making less than $25,000 a year. As a point of reference, the poverty line for a family of four right now is a bit less than $27,000. In case you didn't catch that, that's 38% of American households that earn less than $52,000 and are considered lower class. Assuming there are 2.6 people in the average household, they're barely getting by. So do you really think that 38% of U.S. households can afford an EV? Obviously not. The middle class might be in a better position to opt for an EV. Some 44% of U.S. households are considered middle class. But the income range for the middle class is far and wide. We're talking a household income range between $52,000 and $150,000. So you can see it's widespread. And those on the lower end of the income range most likely can't afford an EV. Right now, the top two most popular EVs to date are the Tesla Y SUV and the Tesla Model 3 sedan. So how much will they set you back? The Tesla Model Y has a starting price of $65,900. The Tesla Model 3 has a starting price of nearly $45,000. Why are EVs so expensive to buy compared to your average gasoline-powered vehicle? Well, there are many reasons. For one, there's the sheer cost of research it takes to develop and manufacture an EV. EVs have different systems, and there are many different types of EVs. Really, developing an EV is almost like starting from scratch every time. True, gasoline-powered cars are updated every year, but they're rarely completely re-envisioned. Plus, the batteries inside EVs aren't cheap by any means. EVs run on lithium-ion batteries. An electric vehicle battery costs way more in materials and labor compared to conventional batteries for a gasoline-powered car. It's true that lithium batteries aren't as expensive as they were back in a Nissan Leaf and Chevy Volt were first introduced, but they aren't cheap today either. Also, EV chargers add to the cost of your EV purchase price. Having a level 2 charger installed in your house is a happy medium between level 1 charging at home and a level 3 charge at a public charging station. But a level 2 charger alone will set you back around $2,000. You need to factor that into your overall EV price. If you're set on getting an EV, don't forget to estimate your charging costs. In other words, your electricity bill. Right now, the national average electricity is about 14 cents per kilowatt. But in many states across the country, electricity prices are much higher. For example, in New England, the average cost of electricity is 24.5 cents per kilowatt. And in the largest state by population, California, the average cost is a whopping 26.71 cents per kilowatt. But just imagine, say, if even half of all Americans started driving EVs. Reality is, the uptick in electricity demand and consumption will drive up the cost of electricity even further. We're back to Economics 101, supply versus demand. We could compare current EV charging prices to current gasoline prices. But you have to remember that in the past few months of this year, gas prices have been at an all-time historic high. This last May, the average retail price of gas gas was $4.54. Yet 2 years ago, the average price of gasoline was $1.96. Many experts believe that if Biden were to embrace pro-energy reforms, energy prices could fall to Trump-era levels. Speaking of President Biden, he has big plans for EVs, but for many Americans, this won't be a good thing. Here's what I mean. A couple of months ago, Biden hosted a virtual major economics forum on energy and climate. This was actually the third time he held a meeting like this since his presidency began. At the forum, representatives from more than 20 governments worldwide discussed urgent food security and energy concerns. They also discussed their commitments and pledges to battling the global issue of climate change. Some governments pledged to decarbonize ocean-based shipping. Others pledged to increase fertilizer efficiency and alternatives, while others pledged to reduce methane emissions. Yet one common pledge kept coming on: put more zero-emission vehicles on the road. And that's where Biden's big plans come in. Actually, dramatically increasing the number of zero-emissions vehicles, or ZEVs for short, on America's roadway had been in Biden's books for years. Earlier this year, Biden announced his administration's target to have half of all new light-duty vehicles sold in 2030 to be ZEVs. This would include fuel cell electric, battery electric, and plug-in hybrid vehicles. Anyway, at the Major Economics Forum in June, Biden once again reiterated his plans to impose far-reaching regulations that will basically force car companies to sell more EVs and other clean green machines. Some of these regulations have already been put in place, while others will roll out in the near future. China and Europe have already been enforcing regulations to heavily promote EVs, and with Biden's new commitment, the world's three largest car makers are moving away from gasoline cars at a faster pace than anyone predicted only a few years ago. That's not to say that this will be an easy policy to carry out here in the U.S. In reality, it's quite an ambitious project. The Biden administration wants to invest billions of dollars to build charging stations for EVs and to lower the EV costs. But last year, the bipartisan infrastructure bill in the Senate only authorized $7.5 billion for chargers. That may sound like a large authorization, but that amount was only half of Biden's original request. And they're not even talking about where this electricity to run these chargers is going to come from. No one is building green power stations yet at any mass production level. Now, with climate change at its worst, you'd think a major U.S. EV announcement like that would spell out good news for everyone. But your average American family, this is anything but good news. Here's the thing about Biden's new policy. Once it's fully enforced, manufacturers will have no choice but to produce zero-emissions vehicles. We can all expect higher costs to buy and own a car. As it is, EVs are already expensive enough for the average American. At the high end of the EV scale, we got cars like Tesla Model S that starts at more than $80,000. And at the lower end are cars like Chevy Bolt, which start at $31,000. Even though it's one of the cheapest EVs you can find in the market, it's still got a price tag that's almost 10 grand more than a larger gasoline-powered sedan like the Chevy Malibu. Now, it's true. There are ways to lower the overall price of a new EV. For example, a federal tax credit can lower the sticker price to as much as $7,500. These credits are available for the sales of new EVs. You have to meet the income eligibility requirements in order to qualify for the rebate. Biden's plan for EVs spells out good news for some car companies, bad news for others. Take Tesla, for example. Tesla makes up more than 2/3 of the battery-powered cars sold here in the U.S. And Biden's announcement to force manufacturers to produce ZEVs will increase Tesla's sales. Did you know that this isn't the first time Tesla can be thankful to the U.S. government? Back in January 2010, the Obama administration granted Tesla a jaw-dropping $465 million loan to help them develop and manufacture the Model S sedan. Peter Rawlinson, former chief engineer at Tesla and now chief executive of Lucid, said that without the loan, Tesla probably wouldn't exist today. He even added that actually the U.S. government made Tesla the success it is today. But then there's Toyota. Toyota Motor is the world's largest automaker. Yet, despite that, they've only recently joined the battery electric race here in the U.S. Compared to some European and Chinese EV regulations, Biden's plans have been criticized by environmentalists as being too modest. By 2030, half the vehicles sold in the U.S. are still expected to be powered by gas or diesel. Yet, despite that, the ban on selling new gasoline-powered vehicles is fast approaching. And with so little marbles in the battery electric game, some critics believe Biden's new regulations will spell doom for Toyota. The big question is, will Toyota be able to catch up in time? Right now, the average American keeps his combustion engine car for 12 years, so we're talking a bit over a decade. So Toyota can still bet on their gasoline-powered cars having gas stations around for many years in the future. Yet, there still is pressure on the company to create and release EVs faster. Toyota also doesn't have the luxury of an almost $500 million loan from the government to help them. Even if Toyota were to start pumping out the BEVs en masse, remember, just because companies make EVs does not guarantee that many people will buy them. If you want to know how big Tesla is, look at the number. This year, between January and March, about 75% of EVs sold were Teslas. They're the market leader. Of Tesla's total sales, the Model Y SUV and the Model 3 sedan made up a whopping 68%. But experts are saying that Tesla's rear view mirror is getting crowded because other brands are creeping up on them. Last year, in the first quarter, Americans bought 18 different EV models. But this year, in quarter one, Americans bought 32 different EV models. And analysts predict that number will increase to at least 50 by the end of the year. So, who's Tesla's biggest competitor? Well, hot on their tail, taking the spot of third best-selling EV of 2022 so far is the Mustang Mach-E. Did you know that in the annual Car Wars series, the Bank of America conducted a study, and it predicted that GM and Ford will overtake Tesla in the EV market by 2025. That's less than 3 years away. According to the study, Tesla's current market share could drop to close to 70 to 75%, all the way down to 11% in the next 3 years. That's a nosedive. Ford and GM are actually expected to approach 15% thanks to their new EV models. Now, seeing that Tesla's absolutely dominating the EV market today, it can be difficult for us to imagine them dropping off to such a position. But experts believe this is a real possibility. The reason why is because Elon Musk is introducing products at a rate that's just too slow, and Tesla's product portfolio isn't large enough to compete in an all-oncoming competition. GM announced plans to spend a massive $35 billion on EVs and autonomous vehicles by 2025. They expect to be the leading EV sellers in the U.S. by 2025 with an estimated 400,000 vehicles sold. Ford announced plans to spend an even larger $50 billion on electrification by 2026. They expect to take the second spot in EV sales by 2025. Competition is a good thing because it incentivizes all players to work harder and offer more to consumers. Theoretically, this is of benefit to the consumers. Regardless of all that, for the time being, we can agree on one thing. The average American just doesn't have enough money to buy an EV. The Biden administration knows this, of course. Yet, it's firmly pursuing its course to reduce emissions regardless of how painful it will be for American families. But now you tell me, is your household in a position to afford an EV right now? And do you want Ford and GM to overtake Tesla? Please share by commenting below. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for your support.